evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Tonight's conversation comes at a critical juncture as we deal with the impacts of increasingly frequent, erratic and intense weather events caused by climate change. Now, this weekend, the global community will gather in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for the COP27 climate conference to make key decisions. In this backdrop, what is Sri Lanka's responsibility to reduce the effects of climate change? Are we doing enough? Is this reflected in our policy making? Prioritizing climate change adaptation through a collaborative approach is the topic of discussion tonight. Joining us in the studio is the Country Director of APAD Sri Lanka, Mr. Firzan Hashim. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Sonali.
First up, Sri Lanka has committed to addressing climate change. It's a party to the Paris Agreement. It has key stakeholders such as the National Climate Change Secretariat working on this. There's a national adaptation plan in place. Sri Lanka has also committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. So we see a lot of good work is being attempted at state level. However, has this discourse been sufficiently mainstreamed? Could you set the stage for us?
Right. Thanks, Sonali. I think this is an ideal time for us to discuss this particular topic. One of the main reasons here is, firstly, we need to accept whether there is a climate change. If you look at the last 2 decades, there were 7,300 plus events, that is recorded events related to disasters, of which more than 3,200 were flood related.
Okay.
Then if you also look at the average, that is 367 odd disasters per year, of which again 44% is related to floods, 28% related to storms, all related to water.
Right.
So in this context, do we actually accept climate change? We had to go back again to 2016, 2017 in Sri Lanka as well. Then recently, we also saw what happened in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Then if you look at what is happening in terms of a report just came out regarding the glaciers which was put out by the UNESCO, which says the melting capacity is so very high in terms of the melting per year is equivalent to the drinking water or the water used by France and Spain put together. So where are we leading towards? So in terms of Sri Lanka, firstly, the state is doing some work, but does it run down to the communities,
right,
to the private sector, to the rest of the others? I feel it's not yet happening that way. And we also need to see how we can institutionalize this, take it very seriously, and also integrate this into all our action plans.
Right. In Sri Lanka, we often see a reactive approach as opposed to a proactive approach. So when we go to villages, sometimes, at times, and I don't want to be unfair, when the floods come, people then start wondering, where's the evacuation route? What do I take with me when I escape to the nearest temple or church? This kind of reactionary approach is seen across villages, rural areas, which each year face floods. So this is essentially the responsibility of the local authorities, the Grama Sevaka, the Divisional Secretariat. And what happens is sometimes, and we've worked together, APAD Sri Lanka and GovMed, on several previous occasions, where we saw how people were thirsting for knowledge, but they weren't receiving information. How does this feature? I mean, we see government agencies working in silos, so one doesn't know what the other is doing, etc. How do you view this?
See, this is a problem not only for Sri Lanka, but if you look at the developing countries, in terms of reducing risks or disaster management itself, the developed countries always look at a mitigation process.
Right.
The action is mitigation. But ours, as you said, is more response preparedness. That's what it is. But we need to change that. This is what we are also advocating for, to ensure that we go more into a mitigating process, reducing risks. So reducing risks means the vulnerable people. Then looking at the resources that they have and the damages and losses. What we experienced over there, I think it was in 2018, was that we had 2016, 2017 floods, a cumulative of 500 deaths, and a loss of 90 plus 80 billion Sri Lankan rupees, plus a recovery effort of 257 billion rupees. So under that circumstances, what actually happened there was we wanted the 2018, if a flood does occur, to have a zero death policy. I think that's where we worked with you. But to be very frank, the coordination, now this is what we are talking about, the collaborative effort, it can get much better. We need to have equal partnership, whether it is with the state, whether it is with the organizations, whether it is with the private sector. And we need to come together for the sake of the community, for the sake of the country, not to have any agendas, whether it is organizational, personal, or so on. So in this context, when we went down to the people and when we told them the basic layman's language, we spoke to them, and the knowledge that we were able to give you within a short time, but how you portrayed it to them, and it went to the living room of the people. And they better understood the systems, and the feedback was so much where even the local authorities and the priests and so on in those areas said that now they listen to us, the people listen to the authorities, so that even if they want to, not to relocate, but then if they want to move away from that area to save their lives, they are ready to do so. So I think this needs to continue, and it has to also be an equal partnership.
Sure. Another issue that we have in Sri Lanka is the lack of climate focus. And just to give an example, we see how in schools the sports meet is mandatorily supposed to be held during the first semester of the year for some reason. These are the hottest months of the year. It's kind of common sense to factor in climate when you make a decision of the sorts. Also, a few years ago, we saw the manner in which children sitting the GCE examination had to do so under umbrellas whilst there was water up to their ankles. I don't know what the question is.
Yeah. See, this is where I think awareness and collaborative awareness comes into play. You need to discuss. Now, the DMC works closely with the examination department in formulating certain guidelines. But again, it has to be proactive. Why cannot we or the DMC or the others say, okay, during these months, or what I would just put back to the hazard calendar. Why don't we have a calendar for the whole year?
Okay.
What are the monsoons?
Right.
What are the pre-monsoon times? When is the rain, maximized?
Yeah.
When is the rain less? And so on. Of course, with this climate change, it has changed a bit.
Right.
But still, we can do that and fix these national events based on that. Now, as you very rightly said, there were so many instances where the military and the others had to support these children to be taken to their, places of the examination centers. But why cannot we not plan ahead? Say, why not have the exams in these particular months? Consult Met Department, NBRO, the DMC, the rest of the others, and then again, the schools, they need to change. They can't just go on the way they are going on. I mean, this is what we call adaptability.
Right.
You have to adapt. Just because you want the children to concentrate on the exams on the second term and the third term, you finish all the activities on the first term. But then it is very hot. If these children go into heat stroke, they will never recover, and then their sports is done with. So these are the changes that as we were discussing earlier, I was just telling, it's not the state's responsibility alone. It's the responsibility of individuals, organizations, schools, and accept that. So we need to do that. Again, I don't have an answer to that, but I think with more awareness, more collaboration, this could be sorted out.
You spoke about a climate calendar.
Yeah.
That is not in place at the moment?
We have been advocating for this even with the private sector, with the schools and the communities.
Right.
Recently, we had an event even with the MSMEs,
Okay.
in terms of how they could revive and ensure that their businesses are good. Businesses take off following the pandemic. In that context, also we told them about how would you have this calendar done up?
Okay.
Your raw materials. When will you have the raw materials ready? When will you, if you have to dry it up, you can't dry it during the wet season.
Right.
Right? Then how will you store? Then what is your supply chain? What are the days or the months that you would use for that? When are the foreigners coming in? When can you sell it? When can you put it on the shelves? So when we told them, they realized, whoa, this is something that we have not thought about. So these are all common sense, but we need to reiterate and keep on telling them.
Also, now if we talk about building resilience among the most vulnerable of people, because they're the worst hit by natural disasters such as floods, droughts, cyclones in other countries, is there enough being done? What needs to be done better?
All right. See, it has changed now. You see urban flooding. It's not only the poor and the vulnerable.
Right.
It is also hitting the rich, the middle class, and the rest of them. And we have seen that.
Yeah.
Even if you see in Europe, if you see it in Australia, even the developed countries as well. So the urbanization has to be planned well. However much you plan, climate change also has its issues. The amount of water that comes down in a particular day or two, as opposed to being spread out for the rest of the 3 months or 4 months on the monsoon period. The quantum of the water coming in is so much, it cannot absorb that. And then we also have these issues related to development. The pavements. Are they permeable pavements? Yes or no? I mean, is it just start? If you look at the water running away into the sea, Sri Lanka, 60 to 70% of the rainwater goes back to the sea. And there we say in the north and the northeast, we have the west, we have drought. How can we see systems of ensuring that we collect this water and send it over there? If not, for it to, generate within our soils itself rather than running into the sea. So in terms of that, there are issues that needs to be addressed, which should be put into the development process. We have district development plans. Do they talk about climate change? Do they talk about adaptation? Do they have funds allocated for these activities? So we have to change. And I think this is the best time to change, because everybody is asking for a system change.
Yeah.
And when you are down and under, this is the time that you can revive and reset and ensure that we get all this right, so that at least the generations which are coming in would be more, they will have a better option than we do have.
Yeah, as you said, at this present juncture, we see this resurgence of public consciousness, which I keep reiterating about on this show week in, week out as well, where people are eager to know what they don't. They're eager to listen to experts. So climate change the conversation needs to be mainstreamed, but it hasn't. When we take the stakeholders of climate change and climate action, there's the National Building Research Organization, the Disaster Management Center, Irrigation Department, the Tri-Forces, the ministries, multiple ministries. Are they working in tandem, collaboratively amongst themselves? and with the non-governmental organizations which are doing some really good work. Your organization is doing fantastic work as well. The school system, the university system. Is this collaboration happening at the moment? What needs to be done to create a greater sort of conversation?
Right. A very good question, difficult to answer as well. But see, what happens is, it's not to say that it's not happening, but it's not happening the way it should be happening. You know, organizations are very rich in knowledge.
Right.
As you mentioned, whether it is the NBRO, whether it is the MET or the others, DMC and so on. But the partnership has to be more effective. The partnership has to be effective where it just goes right down to the grassroots. How does it go there? You have to change the systems. You have to change the systems in terms of, you spoke about education. Children, don't they know about climate change and how to adapt? Because we can't relocate, obviously. So what do? Adaptation. How do you adapt to things that we can? And we can. And then there is this system which you call after you do the adaptation. And if you can't, if you have to move, there is also which is called a managed retreat, where you relocate.
Right.
So these are all systems which are in place. But these particular organizations have to take these things seriously, prioritize it. Again, I go back to what I said earlier. We are more reactive, and we are more in terms of, maybe we are a developing country. We are looking at, we can't spend so much on mitigation, but we need to change that. Because if you just calculate, DMC was mentioning that the calculation of the response, the amount of rupees and cents they spent on response is huge. Those are all development, those money should go to the development sector of it. But here it's going for response. So we need to mitigate, we need to go beyond that, and you need to find partners. Partners are not partners whom you like.
Right.
Partners are, you should be able to work with everybody. And it's not only locally, you need to look at regionally, who are the partners who could work with you, and globally as well. There are different platforms. Now, for example, if you take APAD has 7 platforms in the Asia-Pacific countries. And you can gain so much of knowledge from them, from Japan, Korea, Philippines, Indonesia. Then you have another network which is called the Connecting Business Initiative, which also is by UN OCHA and the UNDP, and APAD Sri Lanka is the representative here. And they are connected globally with 14 platforms right around the world. So knowledge-wise, even funding-wise, as you said earlier, where the collaboration is required, it's possible. Then the academia. Academia is so powerful, so strong. They have all this knowledge. It's a matter of linking with them. Then the media.
Yeah.
The media has all the stories behind them. Whatever happens, they would say, okay, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this is how it was in this place. And the reporters on ground, those guys can help us a lot. So you can't have these differences. I won't work with this guy, I won't work with this chap. No. For the sake of the country, for the sake of development, we need to work together. Sans any personal agendas. That's how we should go forward.
In terms of the Ministry of Education as a key stakeholder in creating awareness on climate action, climate change among children as a priority, how important is it to update syllabuses on, yes, the monsoons, the flooding, all of that, but also the scientific data on what measures children can also be aware of, so that as they grow into adults, they will also know that if I become a businessman, I know these are the strategies that need to be taken, etc.
Yeah. See, it's not easy in Sri Lanka to change the syllabus of the schools. But you say, if the government, whether it is the cabinet or the presidential secretariat, prime minister's office, we have to advocate with them and tell them the importance of this. As you very rightly said, you train these children and then go beyond that. Look at the tertiary education, the universities.
Yeah.
Those are the guys who would come and sit and who would be taking these decisions what we are talking about. So we need to educate them. And I think it needs to be prioritized. We should not wait again until like what the pandemic hit us. But there ought to be change in terms of climate adaptation. Our thinking has to change, our attitude has to change. We have to take care of the resources that we have, because with this current economic situation, more disasters is going to be even worse for us to come out of what we are. So education-wise, we can push forward too. I mean, you can prioritize this. And it's a matter of just integrating even to the different topics that you already have, and then very quietly putting it in a way where the children also would understand that the importance of climate change, and this is happening.
Okay. Asia and the Pacific is responsible for more than 50% of all global carbon emissions, and transitioning to clean energy is key to tackling climate change. So this also then becomes a political decision, which means it is imperative that we have far-sighted, conscientious political leaders who make the right decisions for the country.
Yeah. See, climate change, adaptation, the topic that what we are speaking of today, is actually a political issue.
Yeah.
Right? But you need to have leaders who will take the challenge up and ensure that they put it forward and it happens. But it is also very important in this current juncture. It's not only the politicians, the government officials, the private sector, the academia. They also need to push. We don't need another Aragali to bring in climate change or adaptation. We need to understand, because it's our lives, our children's lives. So if we don't change, there will be another uprising. So it's always best that whether it is politicians or the government officials or us, all of us who are involved in it, to take a very positive thinking in terms of how we can actually get things done. It's a very simple thing. It's not very complicated. That's what we are talking about in layman language. It's not technical, but it's also common sense. Take, for example, the fisher community. We have the northeast monsoon, southwest monsoon. What do the fisher community do? The fishermen from the northeast move down during the monsoon period there, and they fish over here. And the people who are, the fishermen who are in the southwest move to northeast. That has been happening for years and years in Sri Lanka. So the adaptation is there. It's a matter of just looking at what is available and just supporting those, and then, policies and actions regarding that.
Okay, fantastic. We're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
හිස්තැන් පුරවන බුද්ධිමය සංවාදය මාවත. අදම මාවත YouTube චැනලය සබස්ක්‍රයිබ් කරන්න.
ස්වයං විවේචනාත්මකව තමන්ම ඉදිරිපත් වෙන රයිට් මම මෙතනින් අයින් වෙනවා මම ද්විත්ව පුරවැසියෙක්.
ශාරීරික හිංසනය, ලිංගික හිංසනය පහුගිය වකවානු වල වෙච්ච තරම් ඒ විදිහට වෙලා නැහැ.
හිතන විදිහ වෙනස් කරන එක තමයි මූලිකවම කරන්න වෙන්නේ. මොකද මේ ප්‍රශ්නේදී මොකද ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙනවා කියන එක ඒක ස්ථිරයි.
සබ්බේ බායන්ති මච්චුනෝ මොම දඬුවමට බයයි. දැන් දඬුවමට බය නිසා අපරාධයක් කිරීම වළක්වනවා. ඒක අපරාධ නීතියත් එක්ක සිද්ධාන්තය.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 10:00 TV1 ඔස්සේ.
Welcome back. We are in conversation with the country director of APAD Sri Lanka, Mr. Firzan Hashim. We're talking about prioritizing climate change adaptation through a collaborative approach. Let's talk about how important it is for Sri Lanka to work collaboratively, given the fact that there is a large trust deficit that exists between parties in working with the government. This is a very noticeable trend that we see in many sectors. How do we overcome this?
Historically, when we talk about public-private partnership, we always see this lacuna where the private sector has issues working with the government, and the government officials also have issues working with the private sector equally. They would see the private sector as, trying to make profits and at any cost. And in terms of the private sector, they would see as, if we get involved with them, where would the money go, where would whether it would be, utilized in a politician's area of responsibility or the accountability fact. So I think that is the reason you need a buffer. You need somebody in between who would put these parties together. And based on that, Sonali, was why APAD also was created by Japan in the Asia Pacific countries. So we are on board, but still, the trust deficit would always be there in terms of accountability and transparency. So the more partners that you create within that platform, the trust gets much better. More than the trust, it's about the transparency, how things happen, who is involved, what happens to the money, where is it diverted, and so on. So we have been actually successful in terms of getting corporates on board.
Right.
And connecting them with the government. And even today in the morning, the DMC had the National Disaster Management Plan, which they had invited us and the rest of the others in ensuring that the private sector voice is heard to incorporate into the National Disaster Management Plan itself. So it's a long process. APAD has been internationally for 10 years, this month rather. We have been here for 8 years, so it takes time. But you create the trust and work with the different partners. And you should not forget the humanitarian and the development sector, the NGOs, INGOs, the UN. There's so much that we can learn from them, cooperate with them, work together. But again, I go back to what I said earlier. The partnership has to be an equal partnership. They have to be recognized. There is no issues about, taking advantage of this guy or that guy has another agenda. Now, you would also see from other countries, from other academias who are coming in to fulfill their personal agendas. No. If there's something like that, you need to ensure that you tell them off and work with the people who are genuine. Look at local. Why can't you work with the locals first? Why do you want to go and figure out working with the others where they need to learn more from us as opposed to we learning from them? Yeah. So it is about that trust deficit also gets messed up. It also gets, there are issues related to that if you don't interact very openly. The interaction has to happen from the top most level to the ground level. And again, It's about the state, how the state takes it. The GA is looking for something else, or the divisional secretary is looking for something else, and to be upfront. This is what we came for. This is the partnership that we have. And I also blame, to be very frank, I also blame some organizations which are working, whether it is NGOs, INGOs, or corporates, or whatever, who try to also, you know, for their personal or their organizational benefit, try to, you know, satisfy the government officials. That shouldn't happen. That should not happen. It should be for the sake of the people to come out of this. And if we don't do this now, Sonali, I don't think there is a better time for us to come out of it. So the trust is also created by being very frank, being very open, being very accountable, and being very transparent.
All right. Let's speak about the responsibility and role of the business community in Sri Lanka. Again, when it comes to strategy, climate change does not feature or it's not integrated into business strategy. So how must business organizations rethink this and incorporate and integrate climate change, climate action into their business?
Yeah. See, it's a very good question that you asked. I would also add on not only the larger corporates, but the MSMEs as well, because they are the backbone of businesses over here. So in terms of that, I think we all have, the businesses have, you know, the BCPs, business continuity plans. So what does BCP mean? To continue businesses at any cost, under any circumstances. So these are the things which needs to be integrated into their strategies, into their plans, into their action plans as well. But if you take, for example, the supply chain itself, you need to ensure that the supply chain, under duress or any obstacles, if not impediments, that you could overcome and reach out to, you know, achieving your target and ensuring the supply chain is in place. But here again, you need partnership. Now, if you take the BCP of a company, it would be only looking at their company, how things would happen. Have we taken climate change into an issue? Access routes from A to B, how is it? What are the times that we are traveling? Take, for example, the tourism trade itself. We have for the last 10, 20, 30 years, it's about the same route the foreigners will be taken, you know, here, there, and all. But do you look at, again, the hazard calendar?
Right.
Which ones are the bad ones? How can we, you know, reroute them? Go to flatland if it is, you know, if it is raining or so on. So they need to look at that, change that, and ensure that, you know, the safety of the people who also, you know, people who also visit us, also ensure. Because one issue related to, you know, if something happens to a tourist, again, you would see the insurance issues comes in and they would say this is a bad. So we also need to ensure that we change we change our systems, we also change our thinking to ensure that, you know, we fall in line or adapt as we need to.
Okay. When it comes to this concept of disaster management in Sri Lanka, I personally see a lack of dignity in the whole equation, where people have to be people are compelled to be helpless and then depend on all sorts of well-wishers or the government for aid and relief. So this lack of dignity in the whole sort of equation is quite evident. Speak to us about the importance of empowering citizens to know about their right to be protected from these adverse weather impacts, etc.
Right. See, the people, the vulnerable people or affected people, I wouldn't call them beneficiaries, but partners, where they have a right, or they have a right to demand response, and that is what you call dignity. When they demand, we need to work for them. It is not that, we get money from somebody else and we go and just throw it to them. In these circumstances, there are issues related to standards. There are international standards that you need to adhere to. There is the thing called the Sphere Handbook, which provides you what is entitled to whom, how it is entitled. See, women, children, girls, so the rights, the protection rights that they have, all these are incorporated into this humanitarian response system. So this is where the awareness is required for the corporates, people who are working like us, the public sector, especially the people on ground, the local authorities, that this is their right, as opposed to, we are just going and handing over something to them. So you also have the packs, how the packs needs to be, if it is related to hygiene kit, whether it is food. Now food, for example, you need to understand how many calories that you need for a day per person, 2,200 calories. What is available related to that in terms of the vegetables or whatever the items that is available in that particular area. Then you multiply by, so many people for so many days and put it together. So we have done this with DMC, with NDRSC, and these are areas which we are promoting for all the responding agencies also to do it. And also when you go now, in terms of the flood that we had in 2017 and 2016, a lot of middle class people were affected. They would not come onto queues and then, stretch their hands out. So how do we help them? So there were these volunteers we worked with, where we used their personal cars and put stuff into their, boot, and then took it around and they just handed it over. So you should come up with innovative ways to help people. And as you very rightly said, dignity. I think already they are affected. They have lost children, they have lost their mothers, fathers, and so on. And over and above, if you go and do more harm to them, what is the use of us? So we need to be very sensitive, and I think that, and I think those are culpable areas where people also need to be punished if they don't do the right thing.
Before wrapping up, could you take us through the importance of disaster risk reduction, disaster risk resilience, as opposed to disaster management, which is managing a disaster after it has happened?
Yeah. Okay. So disaster management is a whole cycle. Okay. So it incorporates the preparedness, the mitigation, the response, the recovery, and so on. Okay. So it encompasses the whole area. But I think you need to prioritize as to what areas that you need to look into initially, right, or prioritize it. So here I would suggest that we mitigate. We look at how best we can reduce risks. Okay. Because recovery process is also not an easy process. But if you are to recover, which is called the Build Back Better, because in our forum we always talk about Build Back Better, but then one of the corporate colleagues came and said, why Build Back Better? Build better before, as opposed to Build Back Better. Yeah. So that's the way we should be thinking. So these are the ideas which comes from the corporates, which has to be taken by the government and by us, and then take it forward. But disaster management as a whole, I would suggest, so many have been telling, even the CEOs have been telling us, why disaster management? But why not resilience or mitigation or something like that? But irrespective of what the words say, I think we need to be very proactive. I think that is the main area, and also be very humble in helping people, listening to people, because the knowledge is down there as opposed to which comes from the top.
My final question to you, how important is it for the government to take climate change seriously? Because ultimately, regardless of whether we talk about multi-sectoral collaboration, the buck stops with the government.
Yeah. As it is now, the government has to take it very seriously, even more seriously than they thought a year ago. That's the reason for that is because of the economic situation. If you do not invest on climate change adaptation or whether it is relocation or have the strategies related to that. Or I would also say adaptation preparedness.
Okay.
Adaptation preparedness. How do we do that? It has to be mandated with the provincial councils, with the district secretariats, the divisional secretariats where all these plans are coming from.
Right.
And if it doesn't come up, these plans should actually not be taken up or approved. So there has to be some mandate regarding that, because down the years, in a couple of years, we will see the effects.
Can we be hopeful of the action that has been taken up to now, or how much more needs to be done?
Much more has to happen. And it's also difficult under the current circumstances for people to prioritize and invest on these areas until it hits you. But we, like a developed country, we need to think like them, work like them. Though we call ourselves developing, and we have to do more. And we have to take it very seriously. It should not be something like that, no, there is no climate change. Don't worry about that. We'll invest on something else. No, I think education is one. Start from the children, tertiary education and awareness. And you take it seriously, I think it will happen. On the other hand, too, I'm hopeful because today you are speaking about it. We didn't speak about this long time ago, and thanks so much for giving so much of our time on this topic as well, and others would do and would take it seriously and hold them accountable. If you hold them accountable, I'm sure things will work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Firzan Hashim, Country Director of APED Sri Lanka. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the People's Platform. We'll see you again on Monday with the Sinhala edition of the People's Platform. Have a safe weekend. Good night.